Hello, thank you for joining us for Through the Bible Women's Bible Study. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis 29 and 30 at the adventure of Jacob and his wives. So at this point he doesn't have a wife, he is fleeing from Esau and he is going to Laban, his uncle, and his instructions were to find a wife there. But he's on the journey right now. So verses 1 through 3. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And as he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. So something about wells at that time, we picture a well as being a raised thing and you drop the bucket in. Theirs were ground level. So to protect it, they had to cover it. So they would cover it with this large stone. So in verse 1, it said he went on his journey. Literally in Hebrew, it is lifted up his feet. That's a Hebrew idiom for going on a journey. Notice, unlike the servant who brought Isaac, his bride, you don't see any prayer going on here. In fact, this whole chapter, we don't see much of anyone seeking God. That's really concerning. They're going on human power. Jacob is operating on his own agenda. Problem is, he's going to run into someone working on their own agenda, and they have a lot more experience with deceit. As Jacob arrived at his destination, he goes to a well that was used to water the sheep. Wells were the gathering place for the locals. It was the watering hole. A lot of wells were actually ground level. So the purpose of the stone, it stops evaporation. It keeps the water clean from blowing dust. It's security against unauthorized use. It's kind of a camouflage of a location, and it kept animals from falling into it. So a very useful stone. Verses 4 through 10. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well. And see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. In a time when they didn't have road signs, no Google, no Waze, Jacob didn't know where he was until he asked some of the locals. The term for brothers is a greeting which implied a family relationship, similar to saying, without implying a family relationship. Similar to saying, "Hey, bro." So Nahor is actually Laban's grandfather. It just so happens Rachel, Laban's daughter, is just arriving, and they pointed her out. This is the only time in Scripture that we see a woman as a shepherdess. It sounds like he wants these guys to do their business and get out of there. But they have this process they have to follow. Up till now, Jacob was a mama's boy, but mama's nowhere around, so he's making his own decisions. So, the problem, he wanted to be alone, but they still needed to water their flocks, and it didn't seem they didn't remove the stone until everyone was there. If water is scarce, it might be looked at as being selfish if one shepherd watered his flock and possibly depleted the supply before the others had arrived. Remember, well ownership is so important to them. Maybe Laban owned the well, and Rachel, as his representative, had to be there before the stone was removed. So, the solution, removing the stone, was something a group of guys would have to do together. But Jacob wrenched it away single-handedly. Isn't it amazing how strong a guy can be when he wants to impress a woman? Verses 11 through 14, then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran out to meet him, and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to the house. Jacob told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Imagine you're Rachel and this stranger comes up and greets you this way. Now, it's not a big romantic smooch. Relatives greeted each other with a kiss. Once she knows he's a relative, she's pretty happy too. In fact, the fact that Jacob weeps shows the cultural difference in Oriental men. They were more likely to show their emotions more than we are in the West. Rachel had probably heard about her Aunt Rebekah, who had married a wealthy and distant relative. Laban is just overjoyed to see this relative. Remember, they are a hospitality culture, and Jacob is his nephew. But then there's the money. Remember when Isaac's servant had come, he got a ton of money. And this is his daughter. Ka-ching. In fact, the rabbis say that Jacob ran because, Laban ran. Laban ran because he remembered the money Isaac brought. The trouble is, Isaac didn't bring money with him. Then 15 through 20. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Laban brings up the issue of wages only because Jacob had been there for a month and he had been working for free. It may sound like a nice arrangement, but Laban is really telling Jacob, you're going to be a hired servant. Jacob's not used to being the hired servant. Not only was Rachel beautiful, though, she was the first friendly face Jacob met. It was love at first sight, and he was willing to do anything. Rachel means ewe, like a baby, a female lamb. Leah means wild cow or wild ox. What a name. There's a lot of dispute about what Leah's weak eyes means. Some say it means she had bad eyes, and they didn't have glasses at that time. Ophthalmia is an inflammation of the eye, and that was very common. Others think it means that her eyes were dull. They weren't beautiful and full of life like Rachel's. Still, others say the Hebrew word probably means gentle or lovely. One other interpretation says it means her eyes were blue. Bottom line, Rachel was younger and beautiful. Leah was older and not so beautiful. This gives a clue into what life for the 2 sisters was probably like. A lot of conflict and competition. Jacob is developing character, though, and he works. The 7 years is essentially the bride price. Even though Jacob came from a wealthy family, he didn't bring any of it with him because he had been running. So a typical bride price was between 30 and 40 shekels. A shepherd's annual wage was about 10 shekels a year. In effect, Jacob is paying double price by working for 7 years. But Laban sees how desperate Jacob is for Rachel, and he's going to take all the advantage of it he can. But notice Laban doesn't directly say he will give Rachel as a bride. He says she would rather have him, or he would rather have her marry Jacob than someone there. In this culture, Jacob wouldn't have been allowed to spend much time with Rachel. There were pretty strict social guidelines to separate unmarried men and women. Talk about true love waits. But 7 years just flies by because of the love Jacob has for Rachel. Verse 21 through 25. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? Jacob wants what he's worked for. He wants to take Rachel as his wife. So Laban puts together a wedding, but he sneaks Leah in there. So how could Jacob be so fooled? So, wedding customs of their day, the bride was veiled until she was alone with her husband in the honeymoon suite. By that time, it would have been dark, and he might have been pretty drunk. The word feast here really means wild party. We assume Leah was in agreement with this, but even if she wasn't, she was under the absolute authority of her father. But still, the bride had to agree to the marriage. Perhaps Leah thought it was her only chance. Imagine everyone's emotion in all this. Jacob, the deceiver, was deceived. Leah, did she feel rejected? Rachel, she was the one that was supposed to be married. All this because of Laban's sin. But Jacob had reaped what he'd sown. Though we can see this was God's correction on Jacob, it doesn't justify Laban's deception. Verse 26 through 30. Laban said, It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served Laban for another 7 years. So Laban had an excuse. In that country, the older sister had to be married first. Why didn't he say that in the first place? He didn't. Imagine the conversation. Well, didn't we tell you? We don't do things this way. I thought you knew. Laban left him no other option. Jacob had already consummated the marriage. Laban talks Jacob into working another 7 years for Rachel, but he doesn't make them wait to marry. They're married after a week. Leah gets a whole week by herself with Jacob. When there was a wedding, there would be a feast, and that feast would last a week. So that Jacob couldn't get married again until that week is over. Now, Jacob could have waited the week, been married to both wives, and then left. but he didn't. For this, he had been honest. That was something new for him. Laban got what he wanted. Both his daughters married. But it's not going to be smooth sailing. So this dysfunctional family thing just carries on. Jacob married 2 sisters, but makes it obvious that he loved one over the other, and each wife had a maid. It is just going to be a complete mess. Verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. There's a difference of opinion on what the word hated means. Was she actually hated? Some say she wasn't really hated. This is more of a comparison. In comparison to Rachel, Leah was hated. But others say she was hated. Whatever it is, Jacob loved Rachel a lot more than Leah. But God had compassion on Leah. She was the innocent party in all this mess. Poor unloved Leah. God was good to her, even when her husband and her sister weren't. This is the start of the tribal patriarchs. God is going to bless Jacob with 12 sons, in spite of his questionable character, and in spite of the rivalry between Rachel and Leah. The names the mothers give their sons reflect the struggles of the sisters. Verse 32, and Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, now my husband will love me. Reuben means, behold, a son. Now, the firstborn would be the logical one to inherit God's promise and to pass it on. The way it was, the promise was made to Abraham and passed on to Isaac and then to Jacob, the younger son. But that's not necessarily going to happen here. Obviously, even though there wasn't love, Jacob was willing to sleep with her. Verse 33, she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. She still felt hated. So God blesses her with a second son, Simeon, which means hearing. Leah hoped everyone would see that the Lord had heard her. There was a 1995 survey that asked the following question. Have you ever had sex with a woman you have actively disliked? 58% of men answered yes. So verse 34, again she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. Levi means attachment. She hoped the fact that she was pushing out these sons would make Jacob love her and attach him to her because of the birth of these sons. Do you hear her pain in this? She is so lonely and just wanting love from her husband. Verse 35, and she conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. Judah means praise. Apparently she figures out that Jacob is not going to love her, so now she focuses on God. Even though she's been rejected and despised by Jacob and Rachel, God had a purpose. The 2 greatest tribes come from Leah. Levi, the priestly tribe, and Judah, the royal tribe. More importantly, the Messiah came from Leah, the less attractive sister who was neglected and despised, but learned to look to the Lord and praise him. Now, don't worry. It says she's stopped having sons, but she's going to have more. So, what did each person want in this scenario, and what did they get? What did Jacob want? Rachel, Pharaoh's beloved bride. But what did he get? 2 wives and conflict. What did Laban want? To marry off both his daughters into good situations. And he did it in one fell swoop. But he's operating in a scheming, unscrupulous way. What did Rachel want? A husband that loved her and children. What does she get? No children yet. What did Leah want? She wanted a husband that loved her and offspring. What did she get? Offspring. What did God want? He wanted a priestly and kingly line to fulfill the promises of the covenant he made with Abraham. And he wanted to change Jacob's heart to live by faith. Well, so far he does have the priestly and kingly line. His purposes are always accomplished. Everybody else's, they're kind of messed up. So chapter 30, verse 1 through 4. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has withhold from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. There is no happily ever after in this fairy tale. Rachel is desperate. Having children was everything to a woman of their culture. Leah is like she thinks, if I only had my sister's beauty and the love of my husband, I would be happy. Rachel says, if I only had sons like my sister, I would be happy. They have problems. We all have problems. But there's so much tension in this family. They want what the other has instead of treasuring what God has given them. When it says Rachel envied her sister, or your version may say jealous, it means she was red in the face. No green jealousy, she was angry. This anger was mixed with the jealousy. Jacob's answer is cruel and direct when Rachel pleads with him to get pregnant. But he's right. He's not God. Rachel was probably vain and conceited. She knew Jacob had to work 14 years for her, but she probably wouldn't, and probably wouldn't have worked one day for Leah. So we get the story that just like Sarah and Abraham, where Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham, Rachel gives Bilhah to Jacob. It's just going to cause more tension. So your version may include something about bear a child on my knees. That's an ancient surrogate adoption process. The surrogate would sit on the lap of the adoptive mother during both the impregnation, that's kind of gross sounding, and the birth. Although it didn't always happen this way, and sometimes it was symbolic. So Bilhah is now a concubine. It's a wife, but a lesser wife. Verse 5 and 6, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called him Dan. Dan means judgment. Rachel viewed this child as a victory and a vindication for her. She felt that this was proof that God had heard her, and she had taken a step forward in this competition against her sister Leah. She still had a long way to go, though. Verse 7 and 8, Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. They're not even hiding the competition. So she did the surrogate thing again with Bilhah. This child is named Naphtali, which means wrestle. Isn't this a sad commentary? Their relationships are so broken that Rachel openly acknowledges this baby competition. Rachel says, I'm winning even though she only has 2 kids and they're both adopted, and Leah has 4. Maybe because it seems like Leah has stopped having children. And Bilhah, she can keep having children. Verse 9 through 11. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, Good fortune has come. So she called his name Gad. Leah's turn. She has to catch up, or she has to make sure she stays ahead. So she does the surrogate thing with her servant Zilpah. And this son is named Gad, meaning troop or good fortune. These kids are going to be used as pawns in a power struggle. Verse 12 and 13. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, Happy am I, for women have called me happy. So she named him Asher. Zilpah has another son, and Asher means happy. Leah is just as concerned about her status than she is about the children. She's up 4 kids. Going to be hard to catch up with that. Verse 14 to 18. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, Please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Rachel said, Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, You must come in to me tonight, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Wow. Abraham he's been prostituted. Or God, not Abraham, sorry. Jacob. Jacob's been prostituted. He's been bought. So a mandrake is called the love apple in Hebrew. It was thought to improve the fertility in women. And it's still thought of to do that in some cultures. It's considered a love potion. It's a yellow fruit from a belladonna family of plants. The other plants of the family are eggplant, potato, tobacco, chili pepper. Some Arabs still use it as a fertility aid, and they call it the devil's apple. So Rachel makes a deal with Leah. Rachel trades a night with Jacob for Leah's mandrakes. So imagine Jacob coming in from work and being met by Leah and told she made a deal to sleep with him. Again, he's a commodity. Can you sense the hostility between Leah and Rachel? Can you imagine what home life was like? This confirms God's original plan is the best, one man and one woman. So Rachel tries to use her own wisdom to get pregnant by getting the mandrakes and letting Leah sleep with Jacob. But Rachel's still not pregnant, and Leah got pregnant again. This shows where scheming gets us. Frequently, it backfires. So Leah has another son, Issachar, meaning reward. She feels like God rewarded her for giving her maid to Jacob. Not likely. It's probably more like God rewarded her in spite of her giving her maid to Jacob. Verse 19 and 20. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a 6th son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Another son, click it, poor Leah. Zebulun means dwelling. This is her last hope. She hoped that giving him all these sons would win his heart. Verse 21, afterward she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. So, after 10 sons, Jacob becomes the father to a daughter. We aren't given the significance of her name. There might have been more daughters, but we didn't hear about them. But Dinah is going to play an important part of the story in chapter 34. So Leah and the 2 maids will have no more children. There's 10 sons. Verse 22, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. The idea of God's sovereignty over the womb is a repeated theme in the Bible. It wasn't the mandrakes that did it. The purposes of God opening and closing the womb are beyond our understanding, but God has his purpose. Verse 23 and 24, she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. Finally, Rachel has a baby. Joseph means, may he add. Isn't it interesting that Rachel waited so long to have a son, and she finally has one, and she names him, I want more. She's not satisfied. Now, Joseph is going to be really important, has a great story, one of my favorites. But he is not the one who will be the ancestor of the Redeemer. Joseph is the last one for now, son number 11. Verses 25 through 27. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Jacob's original deal with Laban was to serve him for 7 years, after which Laban would give his daughter Rachel. But then he tricked him and gave Leah instead, so he had to work another 7 years. Well, we've hit the 14-year mark. Jacob's ready to go home. But he doesn't have much to bring home except a very large family. But he's willing to do that. Of course, that's not what Laban means. It'll actually be another 6 years before Jacob is able to escape. Jacob ends up turning the tables on Laban and plunder, but that's later. When the Israelites leave Egypt, in the Exodus, they'll do the same thing. They're going to take the wealth from the Egyptians. Laban, if Jacob left, he'd be losing an invaluable worker. Jacob was a good example of perseverance. He hung in there and worked hard. Jacob knows God has blessed him because of Jacob, and he's not ready to let that go. Divination. This means an attempt to know and control the future through a physical means, not consulting God. Moses is going to receive strict instructions later that this is forbidden. In the Mosaic Law, the practices spelled out are erase stone, divination, imitation magic, like using striped branches to produce striped animals, use of mandrakes for fertility, household idols, circumcision of pagans as a weapon. Any of these things show a lack of faith in God. And we've already seen some of that in this story, and we're going to see more. Verses 28 through 34. Name your wages and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now when shall I provide for my own household also? He said, What shall I give you? Jacob said, You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled or spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, Good, let it be as you have said. It took a lot of skill to be a shepherd, and Jacob had that. Laban's flocks had grown, and they both knew it was because of Jacob's work. So they make a deal of how to split the flocks. So a foolproof way of telling them apart was how they were marked. Jacob would keep the spotted and speckled, and Laban would keep the others. Laban likes this deal because the odds are in his favor. In that region, most of the sheep were white and most of the goats were black. Spotty sheep and black sheep were unusual, as were spotty goats. So Laban likes this. Jacob is actually trusting God to take care of him. That's something new. Laban thinks he's cheating Jacob, but God has it under control. A shepherd's wages were sometimes one from every 4 animals that was born. Laban figures a whole lot less speckled and spotted sheep and black lambs are going to be born. Laban believes that the white sheep would only produce white sheep and black goats would only produce black goats, so he's going to win a lot. Verse 35 and 36, But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Laban removes any of the animals that would belong to Jacob to reduce the possibility of crossbreeding. Again, he believes white sheep are going to produce white lambs, and that's what he believes, and he's going to make sure they are far away, 3 days' journey. So Jacob is going to look after the animals with no mark. And who does Laban give his animals over to? His sons. It's the first time we've even heard Laban had sons. Where have they been all this time? Verse 37 through 43, Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the whites of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there, so the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Wow, seems like a lot of work here. We don't have any idea how this method worked. Maybe Jacob knew more about animal husbandry than we do today, but it's more likely that Jacob did his best and God blessed it. This was probably pure superstition. Just as mandrakes didn't produce a child, neither does Jacob's rods produce spotted and striped and speckled. In chapter 31:9, we'll see that it's God's intervention that increases Jacob's herds. So herdsmen in their culture believed the stronger members of the flock mated in the summer and the weaker in the fall. It works better than he could have imagined. In the Hebrew, the words are the man buzzed out exceedingly exceeding. Now here's Jacob's principles for prosperity. Don't make wealth your goal. Don't be afraid to work for others and try to increase their wealth before or as you work to increase your own wealth. Work hard, dedicating yourself to your employer's success, and then trust God. That's where we're going to end today. Next time we'll pick up in Genesis 31 and see how this plot is coming out. Thank you for joining me. Click like if you've enjoyed this session and consider subscribing if you would like to be notified of future releases. Thank you.